the last
still,
time I had batch 2.
you know me now. Please don't send me back that email. Are you getting the roast my phone?
Where's Charles from?
Right here. That's mine.
Oh, it's on the floor here, of course. That was Kevin Murphy. You might have a set of drams, Dan.
Okay.
Let me see.
So half of Nate's
Or-
in a set of
Or
drums?
maybe, maybe he
Here,
can't
hold
get
on
in.
a second, guys. Let me just see.
Do you think you need somebody to let him in?
Oh, maybe.
That's
Hey,
fine.
can you guys see the YouTube? Did it go live?
How do we get there?
So you have to go to the Whiskey Club channel.
Isn't it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the
It's
chat
in the
room.
chat too. The link in the chat.
And I'll put it in here again. I don't know, maybe it.
Oh, if you can.
Alright, hold on.
Wait, here we go.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat again. Yeah, so just let me know if you can.
No, I found it right here live.
Can you let me know if you see Nick standing?
Yes, he is.
Well, you don't need to. Alright, good. That
I
looks
love
actually
them.
pretty good. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna mute myself and mute you guys, and you're gonna just listen to Nick. And just type in the chat room if you can't hear anything or if you have questions, okay? Alright. Bye.
You're just out of the picture. Perfect.
You have to choose the gambling.
Alright, Nick, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Awesome.
And
Action?
yes,
Dance,
actually.
dance,
Dance, Derek, dance.
No, hi everyone. I'm Nick Taylor. I am the co-founder and head blender of Found North. Really appreciate you all coming out tonight. Also, really appreciate this lineup. I don't think I've had 7 of our whiskeys in a while, so I'm pretty excited to go through them. I was dipping into batch 1 a second ago, and I was like, that's where we started. All right. Yeah. So basically, my brother and I founded this company. In 2001 in April is when we launched. But really, we started this company right when COVID hit. And before that, we had an importation license. We were doing brand ambassador work, and this was very much a shit or get off the pot situation for us. We lost all our contracts overnight when COVID hit, and we had been searching for really good whiskey for a long time, and we just kept kind of saying, it's not quite good enough. No, we can't really build a brand around this. And I remember we had like a total existential crisis of like, we've been at this for 3 years looking for whiskey. We've built up a small war chest where we could actually buy a decent enough supply. We can either kind of quit or we can sort of take our best shot. So all's that to say, we didn't come into this being like going to revolutionize Canadian whiskey. It was not like that. It was very much a follow the whiskey situation for us. And it really started with rye, and our company's called Found North, right? Super creative. And really, the whole idea behind it was people were starting to know because of Whistlepig and because of several other brands that were starting to be either found out or starting to kind of let out that the whiskey was coming from Canada. People were starting to realize that, hey, Canadians make good rye. And so for us, we were like, intelligent, serious whiskey consumers aren't going to care that the whiskey's from Canada. They just want you to be upfront about it. And that was it. That was like the basis of our whole company. We were like, we're going to make aged rye from Canada. We're going to make it cask strength. We're going to make it non-chill filter, natural color. Basically do some the things that the Canadians aren't doing with their whiskey. And then we're just going to be super honest about how we make it, why we make it, why it tastes the way it does, and where it's from, hence Found North. Right, very simple. So I'm going to dig in tonight into the sort of the history of Canadian and American whiskey and how they're interrelated and kind of where we fit in that, and get kind of real geeky. But I have a personal pet peeve. I have attended or hosted people who have done whiskey presentations so many times, and literally nothing drives me more insane than listening to somebody talk for 35 minutes before you drink the first whiskey. So
I love this guy.
yeah, so my number one rule is always just drink something immediately. So we're going to start with how this company started, and then we'll get back to how we got there and things like that. But so everyone should have batch one. This was a 16-year cask strength rye, 66% rye, 30% corn, 4% malted barley. The whiskey's in here. It's a 3 whiskey blend. Everything we make is blended. This is a 3 whiskey blend. There's a 16-year rye aged in Hungarian oak. There's a 17-year rye aged in Speyside Scotch casks, and there's a 20-year-old corn. One of my favorite whiskeys. The component's just magical. We use it in almost everything we make. 20-year corn that was 13 years in ex-bourbon and then transferred into new oak for 7 years. And that's how we made this, and I'll explain where the barley comes from in a minute. But this is, wow, I can't even remember, 57.1% alcohol by volume. So cheers. Thank you guys for having me. It's really
Cheers.
nice.
Right on cue.
Someone else back at the door?
And if you laugh like I did right when you swallow it, this lovely rye sensation at the top of your nose.
Here's one without your nose.
No.
So everything in the blend is all Canadian?
Everything is Canadian.
Okay.
Everything
In
we
everything
use-
that we're having
Yeah,
tonight?
everything we have and everything we intend to make will actually be Canadian, which is always fun because you can't imagine how many Instagram messages and emails we get being like, "Hi, I'm from Canada. I love your whiskey. Where can I buy it?" It's not available in Canada. They're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" We're a bunch of Americans, eh? So yeah. So this was really fun to make, and it's really fun to revisit. It took us 9 months to make. It takes us like 2 weeks to make a blend now, but the first one was a nightmare because, as it turns out, rye is extraordinarily difficult to work with. Everything that's good about rye makes it very hard to make it palatable. Rye is super spicy. It's spicy, and rye is astringent. And so people mix up astringency and tannin all the time, right? Because they both mean dry in a very basic sense. So the fundamental difference between astringency and dry and tannin on your palate is astringency the mouthfeel of astringency is, it feels like someone took a pencil fresh out of a sharpener and stabbed you in the back of the roof of your mouth. That's astringency. Tannin is mouth coating across your entire palate. And what's really interesting about astringency is the cure to astringency is tannin, which is weird and took us a long time to figure out, because you would think you take dry, you add dry, right? How could that fix your problem? But the way I've always sort of described it is when you have an itch, right? You literally got an itch. It's an irritated nerve. When you scratch it, it stops itching, right? It goes away. Why? It's not because you've suddenly unirritated the nerve, right? What you've done is you've actually irritated everything around it, and so your brain actually can't process that irritation anymore. It is uncanny. Tannin does the same thing to astringency. You have this kind of sharp bite in the back of your palate. You add tannin, all of a sudden it's mouth coating. it has this kind of lovely rye spice dryness to it. And so for us, when we were first making this blend, we were trying to make 100% rye, because that was the trend, right? We were going, okay, everybody's doing this, we're gonna do it well, we're gonna do it better. And when we were working with the first blender we were working with, we were doing it all over Zoom, right? This actually, we made all of batch one without, batch one and batch two we designed as a company all of it without anyone on the team ever being in the same room. Which is crazy, right? Thank you, COVID. But basically, I thought the master blender was gonna reach through the screen and murder me. We kept being like, yeah, it's really lovely, but you have anything that's got this rye spice and not this dryness? And he was just like, you stupid Americans, don't, like, he was just like, gonna kill me. And finally he was like, let us send you our corn components, that's what we have them for. And that's when we got this 20-year corn that had so much New Wood influence, and we got all this mouth coating corn, and it really started to be to solution from a blend standpoint. It really started to actually balance out the whiskey so that we could get all of the like rich, lovely baking spice of the rye, particularly the Hungarian oak aged rye. Hungarian oak is really tight grained, gives you wood sweetness, but it also gives you like wood spice without as much tannin, and so it tends to give lots of lovely flavors, lots of astringency. So figuring out how to balance that out in the end was the solution, and it gave you batch one, which you guys have in your glass right now. So this was our first whiskey. This is, in a lot of ways, my favorite whiskey that we've made, and at times my least favorite whiskey that we've made, because we were so new to the process when we made it. And sometimes I look at it, I'm like, oh, God, what were we doing? We could have done this or that. But at the same time, when I tasted it, I was like, I felt like we ended up at a good place. Any questions so far?
When did you say that was released?
This was released April 2021.
So I really appreciate all the transparency, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So taking transparency to the next level, do you disclose which distillers are making your spirit for you?
No, I wish we could. Actually, I really wish we could, honestly. For us, at least, and I believe this is the case for most people who are sourcing from the distilleries we're sourcing from, they will not send you samples without an NDA. So that's we just have no ability to tell you. So if you've seen our bottles, the bottles have all the sort of topographical maps on them. We actually reached out to them and we were like, hey, could we just use part of your distillery's area and put it into the topo? And they're like, absolutely not. Someone will figure that out. And I was like, if somebody figures that out, they're gonna figure it out some other way. Like, it's not that hard.
East or west?
Nope.
Or
No. I can't say region. I can't say.
Is it
start
just
with
one
an A.
distillery?
No, actually.
Okay, it's multiple ones, okay.
The first couple blends were, but
Well, you would recognize it, basically.
I honestly, I probably shouldn't even say this, but honestly, like, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out.
Okay.
I think any, like, the folks at Whistle Pig or Barrel, they'd drink our whiskey and immediately know. They'd be like, oh yeah, this is from these guys who we also have talked to and probably tasted their wares. So, yeah, it's not that. God, I'm really hamstrung.
Can
I ask
It's fine.
why they wouldn't want you? Is it because?
It's a great question. Yeah. Why not?
Why
Right?
not? Is it because you're maybe making maybe better than what is the okay?
They don't.
You have to answer that.
Hilariously, when we've made our whiskey with Canadian distillers, they're like, yeah, this is really great. It'd be wonderful if you brought it down to like 43%. That no, like, I don't agree. No, that stylistically they just like different whiskey.
Okay.
And the crazy thing is, like, we think of Irish whiskey, we think of like American rye, we think of these categories as these like incredibly fast-growing categories, right? And you can look at the statistics. I don't remember the exact figures, but like in 2000 there was, X 100,000 cases of Irish whiskey being sold. by 2020 it was like, 6.7 million in the U.S., right? It's like huge growth. You look at rye, it was like 50,000 cases sold in 2000, and 2020 it was like 1.7 million or something like that. In 2000, in the U.S., there were 15 million cases of Canadian whiskey sold. In 2020, there were 20 million cases of Canadian whiskey sold. Like, what we don't realize is the whole game for whiskey is volume. All of the premium, super premium stuff, they're what we call halo whiskeys. They lend reputation to the lower priced products that the distillery is making, and they make this stuff and they sell it. When Brent Elliott makes the limited small batch limited edition, it takes him 3 months to make 12,000 bottles. Like, if you think about how much time the master distiller is dealing with 50 barrels of whiskey at a distillery that has 300 and some odd thousand barrels of whiskey, you're going, okay, why? Well, it's because by making small batch limited edition, they sell a boatload of small batch, right? Canadian whiskey kills volume in the United States. They've been crushing volume for 150 years. Number one selling whiskey in the United States was Canadian whiskey from 1865 until 2010, right? Like, bourbon didn't pass them until 2010, and they kind of leapfrogged each other for a few years.
Do you know?
No, in total,
brands?
like the
Okay.
whole.
What big brands?
All the classic Seagram stuff, Canadian Club, Crown. It's all stuff that
Makes sense.
It's all stuff that I'm guessing nobody in here drinks.
That's what we always say, that what we do is not normal.
Not
Right.
since I
Yeah.
stopped stealing it from my parents. Like,
Totally.
okay.
And so I totally got so far away from your question.
No. But you answered.
And
so
Nick, when there's a question, if you don't mind
Yes.
repeating the question.
Yes, okay. So the question was, what was the question?
Why wouldn't they
Why
let
don't
you
they?
disclose?
Why don't they let us disclose? And does it have to do with the quality of the whiskey? And if I don't know if you remember, but Barrel originally was Dickel. The first batches they released was Dickel, and Dickel made them sign an NDA. They weren't allowed to say where it was from. And then all of a sudden, it's released where it's from, and it wasn't by Barrel, right? Who do you think leaked it? Right, because it has. I don't know if they did, but it would make sense because once they see that the reputation of the liquid is doing well, then they have the opportunity to leak it if they want. But what happens if Barrel comes out with a $150 Dickel 8-year and it sucks and everybody says this is the worst value ever, and they want to be able to distance themselves from it until they're sure. And so I think and honestly, I know how easy it is to make bad blends. I made a lot of them before we made any good blends. And we could easily have released a terrible product that didn't take.
Right, and they wouldn't want their.
And they don't want anywhere near the brands that they have that are, thousands of cases and bigger, right? So that's the main reason. All right, let's get into batch 2. So when we made batch 1, we were simultaneously designing the brand message, the label, everything, right? And our whole thing was rye. We were making rye. We were going to make rye. This isn't a rye, by the way. Just before everybody's like, oh, this doesn't taste like a rye. So we were like, we're making rye. And we really wanted to come out with 2 whiskeys. Because if you're a company that starts with 1 whiskey, you look stupid. I don't know how else to say it. It looks dumb on the shelves. It's like, here's our 1 really expensive whiskey that we make, And so we started making the second rye. We had this really lovely 17-year rye that was aged in ex-wheated bourbon barrels. Really cool. It had this kind of really lovely buttery note. We were blending it with an old corn again, and things were going well, and we were starting with sort of similar ratios to batch 1, and then we started tweaking it, and we started moving more towards an even ratio of corn to rye. Still a rye. And then, of course, we got to 50-50, and it was like, oh shit, this is the best whiskey we've made so far. And then we had the audacity and the masochism to basically try it at 60-40 corn to rye, and it was awesome. And then we tried it at 70-30, and it was even better. And then we made it 80-20, 80% corn, 20% rye. And we were like, shit, we need to have a meeting. Because we have this whiskey, it's not a rye. You could technically call it a Canadian rye, we'll get into that. But what the, you know, it's wonderful, but is anybody gonna drink basically a non-categorizable whiskey? A bourbon from Canada, and it breaks like 9 other bourbon rules. It's like, it's like there's so many reasons. And when we're described as a bourbon from Canada, we just nod our heads because it's just too complicated to get into all of the different rules and say no, it's not. It's not from Canada. It's not distilled the way they want it in the U.S. It's not. You know, it's all these reasons that it's not. Sorry, it's not from America. It's all these reasons it's not bourbon. So we just called it cask strength whiskey, and our whole attitude was, we will go back to selling rye. We'll just keep selling rye, but we'll have this weird thing in our portfolio. People will try it, and over time, it'll sell out because people will drink it, they'll realize it's good, and that'll be that. So this is a 16-year cask strength whiskey. Another 3 whiskey blend, similar, totally different ratios. And it's 64.9% alcohol by volume. This is 129.8 proof.
Like that.
No.
Yeah, doesn't drink like that.
No.
We sent this out to Dave Driscoll out in California, who used to run a really cool whiskey program at Mission Spirits, and he wrote an article basically saying, hey, if you didn't get Stag this year, buy this. Of course, we sold it. It was like batch 2 disappeared, and we're like, oh my god, what the hell? And it didn't hurt that batch 2 also won double gold at San Francisco World Spirits Competition, which was great. So did batch 1 actually, but it sold out very quickly. It turned out people loved batch 2, and when we get in, you'll notice we did another rye for batch 3, and we did them for single barrels, but you'll see 4, 5, and 6, none of which are ryes. So completely changed the trajectory of where our company went. So let's give this a try.
Yeah.
So sorry, what was the percentages?
80% corn?
80% corn, 19% rye, 1% malted barley. I should explain. So the fundamental difference between American and Canadian whiskey, they weren't that different originally. They weren't very different at all, actually. As you can imagine, Canadian and American whiskey have very much the same heritage. They're completely, honestly, like, it's so interchangeable. It's kind of ridiculous. The biggest distillery in Canada is Hiram Walker. Hiram Walker is from Boston. And he lived in Detroit his whole life. And when he founded the distillery, he was just going back and forth from Windsor to Detroit. There was total interlock. Everybody heard of MGP or LDI? Anybody ever wonder why there's just this giant distillery in the middle of Indiana that makes all these random types of whiskey? It's an old Seagram's plant. It was owned by the biggest Canadian company ever, right? Seagram's was the king for all of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They owned 14 distilleries, they owned Four Roses, they owned like 7 out of 10 of the premium whiskey brands, and everything was blended at the time. And so this blended whiskey was the dominant style of whiskey. Here and in Scotland, right, like, we think of single malt distilleries of having this crazy heritage, and they do, and it's real, and it's very cool. But the concept of bottling single malts was ridiculous until 50 years ago. The first single malt that was ever bottled as an official bottling was Glenfiddich in 1963. When Macallan came out, everybody thought it was brandy, right? Like, nobody knew what single malt was because it was always a component. Straight bourbon is very similar. Straight bourbon really wasn't a thing until the U.S. was so tired of getting its ass kicked by Canada that they wanted to basically make something that the Canadians couldn't legally make. And that was their big mission in the 50s and 60s. They pushed for bourbon to be an exclusive product of the United States because they didn't want Seagrams to make it. And they wanted to make something that was unique to the U.S., that was really had its heritage in Kentucky, and they got very much away from blended whiskey. That was kind of a big part. It was like blend equals bad. But before that, everybody made blended whiskey, right? Like that was by far the biggest category of whiskey. And so in the early 1900s, really like 1910, the Canadians started adding enzymes to their grain during the mashing, and they stopped putting barley into everything. And it was really effective, actually. Basically, you need barley, and you needed barley historically for the enzyme content. Barley has an enzyme that will convert starch into sugar. You need sugar to make any alcohol, right? Fermentation is the process of yeast eating sugar. Yeast can't eat starch. So it has to, you have to convert the starch that's not only in the barley, but in the corn, in the rye, into sugar so that you can make bourbon, that you can make Canadian whiskey, you can make anything. So when the Canadians figured out that they could cultivate the enzymes and add them, they said this whole mash bill thing is complicated and it messes with our pH levels. It messes with our acids. And acid is a hugely important component of making whiskey. All your interesting congeners, all your interesting flavor components are coming from a combination of acid and alcohol, right? So you'll hear of like ethyl acetate or methyl this or whatever it is. It's all the different combinations of acid and alcohol. So when you do a fermentation where you have barley, you have corn, you have rye in it, you're effectively compromising based on, you're trying to find a yeast strain that will kind of cooperate with all of those different grains. So the Canadians said, screw that, what we're going to do is we're going to just add the enzymes, and we can make 100% corn, we can make 100% rye, we can make 100% wheat. We don't have to put barley in everything, and we can pick a yeast strain that will work for each grain. And the concept behind that was we are going to ferment, distill, and age the grains individually so that we can effectively create paints for the master blender to paint with. The Canadians believe beyond anything else when it comes to whiskey making that making the whiskeys, the base whiskeys, is the science. Creating the blend is the art. And they really think of it that way, and they really think about it. So all of their master distillers are called master blenders, even though they're exactly the same thing, right? Brent Elliott spends one day a year actually distilling. His whole job is blending. That's every master distiller in the United States. So these guys, they basically said, all right, we are going to make all of these, effectively all of these different tools for our master blender to work with. So push forward to basically now, Canadians will do, like, if you've ever been to a bourbon distillery, you'll see they'll often talk about a doubler, right? So basically their process is it goes through a column distill on like a stripping run where they basically get the beer up to 60% alcohol, and then they put it in a doubler, which is effectively just a pot still. So it's basically like column to pot. The Scots are doing, double distilled, and then for their grain whiskeys, they're doing double distilled in column, right? So it's basically all these different techniques. Canadians do all of them. They do column into pot, they do single column, they do double column, they do just malted barley. They'll just do single malt the way the Scots do it. They do virtually everything. They do it to all different proofs, all different fill strengths, all different barrel types, and they create this huge diverse palette to blend with. Interestingly, some of the distilleries take their rye and they actually will keep a little bit of malted barley in it, even though they're adding enzymes. They do that from just because they think it creates consistency from a flavor standpoint. So, when you see a percentage malted barley in our whiskeys, like 1%, batch 2 has literally 1% malted barley, we didn't sit there and be like, yes, 1% malted barley changes the whole thing, right? It's like, no, that's actually just left over from what was in the rye. So, should we go to batch 3? Alright, so it was funny, we made batch 1, we made batch 2, we released both of them, and then we went to make our next 2 batches, which were 3 and 4. With rye, when we made it, everybody was like, yeah, we love batch 2, we love batch 1, we love batch 2. Batch 1, very heavy on the spice. And so we're like, all right, we'll really lean into some of the cool things that rye can do. We're going to basically make a really bright floral rye, which is something that you basically can only do if you're aging rye for a really long time and not doing it in new oak. This is the only whiskey we've ever made that doesn't have any new oak in it whatsoever. And as a result, you get incredible oxidation. We built this whiskey around a rechar rye. So they stripped the inside of the barrel and they recharred it after it had already been used once. Recharring is awesome because you basically are getting all of the oxidative effect, right? Just to get super nerdy before we have too many drinks in us. But basically, whiskey is not just grain plus wood. There's the oxidative effect. Oxygen molecules are super stable. If they weren't, we'd all be screwed, right? Oxygen is very stable. O2 is a really stable molecule. It becomes reactive when you char the inside of the barrel because the charcoal will actually polarize the oxygen molecule. So it'll basically strip an electron from it. And then all of a sudden it becomes super reactive and it reacts with all the whiskey and it gives us all our lovely flavors. If you've ever had...
I never knew that.
Okay, so like if you ever had Old Scotch and it has that really beautiful bright fruit note, it's kind of unique to really old single malt, that's oxidative. That's not from wood, that's not from the barley, it's literally just the oxygen's been interacting so long that we've started to get enough esterification that we start to get these really cool aldehydes and esters that produce these really lovely bright fruit notes. You can get those from rye, we just never taste them because it's usually bombarded by new oak, right, and spice. The cool thing about making this whiskey, and this was probably batch 1 was the hardest because we didn't know what we were doing. Batch 3 was the hardest to get right because what we discovered was if you have a component that's spicy and you blend it with a component that's fruity and floral and bright, to retain the sort of fruity floral notes, you need to be at about a 6-to-1 ratio of fruity floral liquid to spice. Spice completely trumps those bright floral notes. So to make a whiskey that actually had a rye backbone, right? This still drinks like a rye. It still has a spice backbone, but actually emphasizes that bright fruit floral note was extremely difficult. And the key was we used a 21-year-old corn component that was aged in ex-bourbon barrels. And it had all these really lovely honey notes. It had this really great foundation. And when we blended it with the rye, it didn't kill the rye spice and it didn't kill the floral fruit notes. It more gave it texture and it gave it roundness and it actually kind of enhanced that bright floral fruity note. It was fun. It was fun. We had a lot of fun making this.
You guys are ballsy to like
Thank you.
to go out and just to like, and even on your batch 2 to try to break a trend and then to break that trend again on 3 instead of going 2 sold well, so let's do it again for 3.
Well,
let's
we did
do
that
something
with 4 and
completely
6,
different.
so.
Yeah. But it's true. I mean, and everything is delicious. So I mean, it's good on you guys to continue to see that vision through to do something different each time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any weeded whiskey in this? 'Cause
No,
there's
five there is.
Because this has the finish has this really light thing that it's not typical of a rye.
No, yeah.
It's that.
Thank you. I take that as a compliment. That was what we were going for. Blending is not, blending is so not like tasting notes. I talk about Brent Elliott a lot. I think he's my favorite. I think he's like my favorite person in the industry, largely because when we had just no reason whatsoever for him to take us seriously, he was just like, yeah, come in to my office for 4 hours and I'll tell you how to make whiskey. But what was really interesting about talking to him was when I started asking him about making the limited edition whiskeys, I expected him to be like so in the tasting notes, right? Like I thought he was going to be like, so we had this, you know, golden apple note that we loved, and we had this crispy, you know, whatever, cinnamon note that we were blending it with, and when we combined them, we knew we would get, I don't know, right? Some nonsense, yeah, some nonsense, like, and I was like, so, like, small batch limited edition, 2015, one of my favorite whiskeys ever, like, tell me about it. He was like, well, we had the right amount of sweet, we had the right amount of spice, and we had the right amount of wood. And I was just like,
He kind of says it like that too.
no, my good dad was like, I was like, that's it? Like, I'm expecting like the berry fruits to jump out from behind the bush. You know what I mean? Like, where is all the and
Fruit of Loom.
and it's having sort of now been blending for a couple of years. It's not like that at all. You're like when you have one note and you have another note and you put them together and you change it by 2 percentage points, both those notes go away and you have new notes. There's none of that nonsense of like hyper analyzing the whiskey. It's much more trying to get certain pieces to fit together. We often think of it as literally just base notes, mid palate, and top notes. I mean, literally that's it. And we will sit there and go, this doesn't have enough base. This doesn't have this. This has these top notes that we want to keep, and that's it. And so when we made batch 3, it was honeysuckle. It was those top notes. It was that bright sort of floral honeysuckle creaminess. And we were like, we want to preserve this, but create a well-rounded whiskey. And so when you say, I'm tasting this on the finish, thank you. Like, yes, that is what we were going for, and it was damn hard to get there.
It's really good. How big are your batches?
Great
Not
question.
to be too personal.
How big are the batches? No.
No, Chad.
That's fair. Let me whip out the numbers. So the batch 1 and 2 were like just over 1,300 bottles, 1,350, something like that. 3 and 4, we just about doubled them. I think it was 2,700, something like that. I don't know, it may say on the bottles. Batch 5, which we'll get into, we only had 3 barrels of the wheat component that we used. So it's like that was the limiting factor. So we made 2,072 bottles. I remember that one because I wish we could have made more. And batch 6 was like 3,500, maybe 3,700, something like that.
So each batch is getting bigger.
For now. Yeah.
Can I ask
Yes.
a question? 20 years. When you're, maybe I don't know this and others doing this for me, when you're blending, are you, and I know you're not at the place, or are you at
No,
the
I'm at
place?
my dining room table.
Okay. Are they sending you individual stuff, and are you peptiding them together?
Yeah. Okay. So he's asking how we do the blending. So basically, when you make when any big distillery makes a whiskey, they store everything in lots, right? So like lot B, right? The Van Winkle, right? The lot B. That is actually basically a specific run of whiskey. So if we made 150 barrels today, and it was all from the same grain and the same fermentation tank, and we did everything the same, and we put it in all the same barrels from the same cooperage, and then we would actually intentionally put them all kind of roughly in the same spot in the same floor of the same warehouse, right? And the idea is if we took those 150 barrels and scattered them all over the place, how could a big distillery ever function, right? Because you'd have to be piecing together thousands of barrels to get your batches, to get your releases. So what they try to do is they try to basically create consistency by doing everything in lots. We have 150 barrels that all taste close to the same. Not always the same, which we learned the hard way, but close to the same. And so for us, when we're buying liquid from distilleries, we're buying it usually in lots. And so what will happen is, say we own 15 different lots. When we want to blend, they will pull a sample from all of those from one barrel from all of those lots. They will send those samples to us. We will blend at the milliliter scale, right? Like, totally small scale until we figure out exactly the ratios we want. And then we go back to them. They pull from different barrels to make sure that it tastes the same. They make a test blend based off of what we've said. They send it to us. We compare them side to side to what we've been making to make sure it's consistent. And then we say go, and they make the blend to scale.
So they vat it and they.
Yes. Now we have a facility in New Hampshire, so sometimes they do it for us. They'll do it and put it in tote, something like food grade plastic, and ship it to our warehouse in New Hampshire, and then we'll bottle it there. Sometimes if we're mixing and matching from different distilleries, they're obviously not going to do it for us, so they'll send us the components and in the volumes that we need, and then we do it. But they have the incredibly expensive equipment that measures, the density meter at scale, right? So because they do everything in liters of alcohol, it's confusing. Yeah.
Taxman's involved.
Yeah, the taxman is involved.
Have you considered getting anything from American distilleries?
Yeah, we've thought about it.
Because obviously you're paying more taxes too to be coming from
Totally,
Canada.
and we've fiddled around with. We've taken like American whiskey and just blended and seen what happens. It works well.
Yeah.
But it's already confusing enough to explain that we're Americans making Canadian whiskey.
Yeah.
In a way that
That's
doesn't
fair.
make
I
any
just thought
sense
from a
for
business
Canadian
standpoint
no,
that
no,
I'm
no,
sure
it's a
that's
good
dawned
question.
on you.
And we thought about it.
Yeah.
And if the components that we needed suddenly dried, if we couldn't get rye from Canada anymore, but we could get 4-year rye from here, and it was really good, and we could blend it, and it worked, probably would.
Yeah.
But for now, we've found what we've needed, so we've gone there. And look, like, you guys have, I'm sure, seen just the ridiculousness with things like 4-year-old MGP bourbon selling for $199.99. You're just like, what the hell is going on? For us, like, we can. The trick is we have really good, really old components that we can make really good whiskey with. The hurdle is we have to convince people that it's worth it to drink Canadian whiskey, and that makes the price way lower for us. Period. Like, that's the economics behind it. So if we're willing to, be here, right? Like, if we're willing to come in and say, this is why we do it, this is how we do it, this is how it's made, and we think once you taste it, you're gonna say, hey, shit, I'll drink 17-year Found North over this because I don't care that it's Canadian, it's made the right way.
Yeah.
We think that's a better proposition than making the same whiskey that's already out there, and then just trying to
Makes
sort of
sense.
out-market other people.
Yeah.
It's also less fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is fun. I'm telling you right now, like, doing something where people say, like, wow, these guys are really trying to redefine a category. That's much more exciting for us than we didn't have. And again, like, we didn't have a vision of we're gonna make 7 years. Like, I feel like you look at High West. High West had exactly a vision for what they were gonna be. They went out and they did it, and that's beautiful and good for them. We were much more a follow the whiskey. It wasn't like we're absolutely gonna make Japanese whiskey aged in sherry casks. Let's go find it and do it. That's our vision. It was much more, where's the best whiskey that's most underappreciated that we can build a brand around? And this is where we ended up.
What about finding, instead of components, but finding actual mash bills already, and using those for
We've been doing
blending.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We actually bought a bunch of whiskey that had already been blended and put back into cask, and has been aging for 18 years.
Okay.
And it's awesome. The components are absolutely awesome. So we'll
Because then
100% do that.
they mature together.
Totally, and that's
know,
when we get into the single barrel.
Because we talk a lot about barrel entry and
Yes.
how much water
Totally.
is added at the
Yes.
beginning and all of that.
Yeah, and that's
So-
one of the weird things about like cask strength. So we've been working on some projects where we've been doing the blend beforehand, but now we're flirting with the idea of like there's a huge difference between ethanolysis and hydrolysis, how the water interacts with the wood and how the whiskey interacts with the wood. And you don't necessarily want more of one or the other. They do different things. Maggie Campbell was the freaking best at this at Privateer. She manipulated the hell out of the filling strength, and it's like we totally want to be able to flirt with those kind of things because you can completely change the construct of the whiskey, and then you have new paint, right? Like for us as blenders, you feel like okay, if you have 15 samples that you're working with, you can make infinite blends, right? But if you have 15 spices in your spice cabinet, you can't just blend them however you want and make things that taste good, right? Like only certain combinations actually work. So for us, a huge part of the project now is not just how do we take the stuff we own and make it taste good. We've been doing that. How do we make new stuff? Well, you can either change the recipes, but we feel like we have really good recipes, or you can change the components. So we've started really getting into changing the components, or you can blend it and finish it, which is also something we've started doing. All right, let's get on to batch 4. So,
Sorry, you said you can't sell this back to Canada? People have asked. You said it earlier.
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
kidding? Or
Yeah.
are you serious?
no, I'm dead serious. None of our whiskey's available for sale in Canada.
Is that just because, or?
It's complicated. It's because effectively all our licensing is here,
Yeah.
right?
You have to get licensing up there.
Yes, we have to basically. We either have to have a bottling facility that was bottling it,
1,
Right.
5, and 6.
or
Oh, it is?
no, totally.
Canada is?
Yeah, so we either have to basically like go through the whole process of setting up a bottling facility there and getting all of our licensing and business in there, and then we can operate that way, or we can import it, bottle it, pay all those taxes, pay all of that, ship it back into Canada,
Yeah, which doesn't make any economic sense.
pay the taxes again, and sell it for more expensive than we're selling it here. So it's been complicated. Yeah, we really want to be in Canada, but it hasn't made economic sense yet. All right, yeah.
So, you've had 6 batches in roughly 2 years, so about every 4 months?
So we've done 2 batches at a time so far. So we released 2 batches in April of 2021. We released 2 batches in, was it December of 2021? And then we released 2 batches in September of 2022. And we're gonna move into our next batches probably this spring.
So, the reason I asked, I was getting at, you said your wife doesn't necessarily appreciate you sitting at the dining room table doing all this.
Yes.
For each of these releases, how many evenings are you spending at your dining room table?
Getting hammered. Yeah, it's a good question. The crazy thing is, so the funniest thing, for the first 2 months, the reason we weren't making good blends was because we truly didn't appreciate palate fatigue. We'd be on our 16th blend of the afternoon, and we'd be like, got it. That's the one. Write the formula down. You'd wake up in the morning hungover, and you'd mix it up, and you'd be like, this is so off kilter. What the hell was I thinking? And it really took a long time to start to appreciate that we can't just throw paint at the wall and see what works. We had to start developing a lot of structure because it's a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. You can't just start going through each straw and seeing what happens. There are too many things that it could be. So what we ended up doing was getting really, really familiar with the lots. So spending more time with individual components, and then starting to conceptualize how we thought they would blend together, and then doing a little bit of experimentation to see, okay, when we want fat, we're adding this component. When we want spice, we're adding, start to get how it was working. And then we started constructing the whiskeys around singular components. So actually all our batches have a maturation on it, and it just lists one of the maturations. We originally did all of them, and it looked like a shopping list. It was just the stupidest label you've ever seen. So we're like, all right, what we'll do is for maturation, we'll say the wood type or the finishing cask or whatever it was that we constructed the whiskey around. That ended up being kind of the foundation stone. And so that started to really speed up the process, because it was, rather than just going, all right, well, let's try these 4 together, or these 5 together, or these 3 together. It was like, all right, this is our whiskey. How do we get it to be a little bit more this way, or how do we round this edge, or how do we add a little of this? And we started doing it that way, and we started blending. When we're fine tuning, we can only do basically 4 samples at a time before the palate fatigue is to the point where you're really not blending with any precision. And very annoyingly, your palate is by far its best when you're hungry. Tricky little evolutionary thing that happened.
But then you also get drunk faster.
Yeah. So we do when we're finishing blends, it takes us about 2 weeks, and we'll do 4 samples before breakfast, 4 samples before lunch, 4 samples before dinner for 14 straight days.
It's after 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do that, but I'm not blending.
We do about 10 milliliter samples. The other weird thing for us is we do everything at strength. We do all our blending at strength, which I don't know who else does that, but it's not common. The reason is we find that texture is as important, if not more important, than flavor. We are very, very texture driven. I've always been a texture driven whiskey drinker. I think the difference between a good whiskey and a phenomenal whiskey is almost always in the texture, not in some exquisite combination of flavors. It's much more the depth, the richness, and how it coats your palate and how it evolves on the palate. And so we do it at strength. So we do 10 milliliter samples at strength. So you're talking about like a drink and a half before breakfast, a drink and a half before lunch, a drink and a half before dinner. I effectively don't drink outside of work anymore, because literally it's like my liver can only exist for blending. Yeah. Anyone want to come over? I've got 250 open bottles of whiskey that I'm never going to finish.
Where in New Hampshire do you live?
That sounds like Vinny's house.
I live in Massachusetts.
Okay.
But, yeah. All right.
Where do you live?
Yeah, Weston. Okay, so batch 4. All right, so batch 4 was super fun. So we had made batch 2, and we didn't want to exactly recreate it. Actually, what we wanted to do was stretch it. So I love batch 2. I think batch 2, I loved everything about how we made it, except for I thought the finish was slightly abrupt. I thought it kind of went and fell off a cliff a little bit. And so we were like, all right, let's take 4 and let's make it similar to 2, but let's give it depth, and let's make it linger, and let's make it longer, and let's stretch the hell out of it. And so this was built around a 25-year 1996 corn component that was aged in Hungarian oak. The component drank a lot like the 20-year that we used for batch 1 and batch 2, but all of your classic kind of caramelly bourbon notes were a little more concentrated sugar, so almost like molasses. Your sort of wood character was giving you like a faint mesquite, and it was a blast. We loved this blend. So this is a 4 whiskey blend. Again,
So good.
Thank you. 80% corn, 19% rye, 1% malted barley. We just ran it back with that percentage. We used a 21-year corn, a 25-year corn, and 2 18-year ryes. This was the John Barleycorn Canadian Whiskey of the Year last year, which was fun.
Would you say that rye percentage was?
Sorry.
19. There's the John. Yeah, there was a fun article written about SFWSC, which is San Francisco World Spirits Competition, and the John Barleycorn Awards. And basically they were like, the SFWSC is like the Academy Awards, and the John Barleycorn is like the critics, right? It's like it's all really deep industry people who do John Barleycorn. It's fun to look at the list of people who are doing it, because they're just such like huge whiskey nerds. So it's fun. It's a fun whiskey to make for that audience, and yeah. So this was their pick for Canada last year, which was cool.
What's the deal with so much Hungarian oak in Canada?
Oh, you got Holly to ask it.
Repeat it.
No,
What-
Rebecca
the
was
question-
messaging me to have, what's
What's
the deal with
with the
Hungarian
Hungarian oak? So why so much Hungarian oak? So really what's interesting is like, we have all these weird finishes in our components, and a lot of that is because we like to buy people's experiments. So if you go into a distillery, like if you're some big ass distillery and your plan is to do a Hungarian oak release, you don't go, tomorrow we're going to lay down 5,000 barrels of Hungarian oak, knowing nothing about how it will interact with your whiskey. You do 5 barrels, you watch it for 5 years, you take samples every year, and then you decide what your formula is going to be and how you're going to make that whiskey, right? But what do you do with all those barrels that you put in Hungarian oak? Those 10 barrels, that weird number that you can't really build a brand around, you can't make any whiskey around, but they're just sitting there on your books. You sell them to Found North, and we take them and say thank you very much. And so we just found a couple distilleries that were working with Hungarian oak as an experiment.
Where?
America.
No, what, I mean, like.
Canada.
Oh, Canada?
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, they can be barrels from
No,
anywhere.
the barrels, we were getting Tokai barrels.
Yeah.
And actually, really interestingly, the dominant oak species, I believe, in Ireland is actually Hungarian oak. So I think they may have been sourcing it there. They didn't give us more details than that.
Okay.
A lot of times, sometimes with barrel brokers, you'll get a little bit more details. So like we did a single cask this year that we aged in an Isla barrel, and we were told it was an Ardbeg cask, and I talked to Ardbeg, and I was like, this is cool that I tell people this. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Send us the whiskey first. It's like, here. And they're like, yeah, okay. So sometimes you get like a lot of details, and sometimes they've bought it from a third party, and you have no idea what it actually is. But yeah, it was just, we stumbled into it, and we were like, it's really hard to use. It's a very, very feisty, and we usually are using it in 5, 10, 15%. We're rarely using it. This one was, I think, 35% of the blend. That's by far the most we've used it, because it's very unwieldy. Sometimes I feel like I'm like trying to.
You're not putting it in the barrel, correct?
No,
it's
they are.
already okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean you're not
What are the notes that are coming from Hungarian oak that are different than
Molasses.
Okay.
Molasses, and like you're kind of, you know how you get that really lovely cinnamon note with bourbon, with New American oak. That ends up being like allspice or like nutmeg, kind of heavier, darker. I think of flavors all the time on a color scale, which is a little weird. But yeah, I'll think of a whiskey and say like, oh, it's a darker shade. This is like so I'll think of notes as having like darker colors, which is a little odd, but Sammy does too, who's the blender that I work at. Tiny little bit of synesthesia. It darkens everything, right? It just brings everything and makes it a little seedier, a little bit of Louisiana. You know what I mean? Just anybody from Louisiana? Sorry. No, I just think of it as just like, it's got a little bit of like sultriness to it, right?
What's the ABV on this one?
This one is 62.4.
And the number 3?
This number 3 was 55.1.
This does not seem like it's 62%.
Nope.
My palate is either fatigued or very well blended.
It's beautiful.
It's funny that you guys.
It's chewy. Hungarian oak's really chewy.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't like it.
By the way, Louisiana is where we get all of our molasses.
Gotcha.
For the reason why I think. I'm just worried that I'm somewhere in the Ethernet, someone's like, Louisiana, that asshole.
I understand what you're
The
saying.
finish is really wonderful on this. The nose is actually more subtle than on number
A little
2.
tighter, yeah. Yeah,
The
drop
nose
of
on
water.
two is-
So what are you using the molasses for?
Yeah, that was.
From Louisiana?
Yeah.
No, I just happen to know that's where all our molasses are. No.
I'm not
So,
trying to.
it was a rum company I worked with.
Oh.
They sourced from Louisiana.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that the guy?
All right, any questions? We'll have a quick.
So you mentioned rum barrels, have you finished in any rum yet?
I just got asked if we finished anything in rum. No, we haven't liked any rum barrels that we've had an opportunity to work with yet. Yeah, they can be a little funky and they can be a little sugary. Yeah. So far, no. What about you?
So, when you're blending and you're letting it rest, how long do you let it rest before, and are different components take longer to
Or repeat the
rest?
question.
Yeah,
before
so-
the whole-
So he's asking. So he's asking about how long do you let it? Basically, when we're blending, how long do we let the components marry? But are you talking about when we're doing test blends? Or are you talking about when we make the whole thing? Because the weird thing is when you do test blends, it takes an hour. It takes an hour for it to really settle.
Okay.
And we learned that the hard way. Actually, we learned that the good way. Because when we were first making it, we'd make the blends, and the blends started interacting. One, they're at different proofs, so they immediately start having this exothermic reaction. So everything gets hot, and so everything tastes hotter than it actually is going to end up. And they tend to be, they really need a half an hour to settle. So when we're blending, obviously you don't want to be like, oh, cool, okay, I made this. Tastes pretty good. What if I do this 2% different? Cool, I'm gonna go for a jog, and wait for this thing to settle. So usually when we're kind of in the more experimental phase, we're just blending and knowing kind of in our heads that it may settle a little bit. But the funniest thing was when we made batch 1 and 2, we really didn't understand that. So when they sent us the test blends, which had been settling for however many days they shipped, and we poured them, and I was like, oh shit, this is a lot better than what we've been making. What the hell happened? No, the interesting thing is they take a couple weeks in tote at scale to really get to where they're going to be. So we like to let them rest for 3 or 4 weeks at least. We've had whiskeys. It's amazing. I never understood. Until we started making whiskey, I really didn't understand how much the actual just process matters. So there's bottling equipment that pulls a little bit of air into the whiskey as part of the bottling process, and then there's bottling equipment that doesn't. We've used both and seen how fundamentally different the whiskeys are. Like, what the hell? They can't be that different, right? Small amounts of filtering changes. So if you just filtering out, you're just doing screen filtering. It's astonishing how different things really affect the whiskey, and one of them 100% is marrying. We agitate our barrels. We do a lot of stuff in our New Hampshire warehouse because it makes so much more of a difference than I ever frickin' believed. When I go to a distillery and they'd be like, yeah, we ride the barrels like a cowboy, because we think it does this or that. I was just like, this is marketing bullshit. I don't believe anything you're saying. And now I'm just like, yeah, we ride the barrels like a cowboy, baby. It makes a big difference. No, it really is astonishing.
So the chemistry you teach us is amazing. Do you have a background in chemistry, or is it Native American literature?
None whatsoever. Native American literature. No, it's actually hilarious. I took chemistry in high school. I took it twice in college. I never did particularly well. I was a history, political science double major. Had no interest in science whatsoever until I got into whiskey. And what happened was, when I really first started getting into whiskey in like 2013, I would go to distilleries, and so much has changed in the last 10 years in whiskey. 10 years ago, we were still in the era where, like, people believed that the biggest contributor of flavor in Scotch was the water, right? Like, the nonsense that still existed in terms of, like, old branding crap being what people believed the science was really still predominant. And as I started learning stuff, it was amazing how often two completely opposite things would be told to me by pretty high level sources, right? It would be distiller over here is telling me X, and not distiller over here is telling me Y. Distiller over here is telling me not X, like negative X, like completely opposite things, you know. And it got to the point where I actually started to have to learn some of the science to vet the information I was getting, and I was so interested in what really was contributing to flavor that I got way more involved in the science than I had ever, and way more interested in it than I ever had been in the past. And then when we started making it, that just went to a whole nother level of like, okay, I really want to fundamentally know what happens when we do this and why, because we need to either recreate that or avoid it next time, right? Cool. All right, so let's do batch 5. I love batch 5. I'm gonna say right now, batch 5. It's really hard because it's like picking. I don't have kids, but this is like picking a kid, right? Like I feel bad. Like I don't want the other whiskeys to hear me say this, but I absolutely love batch 5. I think it's my favorite whiskey we've ever made. This is an 8-year-old whiskey. This is our youngest whiskey by a mile from an age statement standpoint.
It's what, the youngest?
By far, yeah. This is a 2 whiskey blend. This is a really simple blend, and effectively this is 27% 8-year-old whiskey, 100% wheat whiskey, aged in new American oak. We had 3 barrels of this. That was it. We blended it with 73% 21-year-old corn that was aged mostly in new oak. This is our version of a wheated Canadian bourbon. If a real blender, if a real Canadian blender heard me say that, I would have my feet cut off. But
wheat
yes,
and corn?
It's wheat and corn. This is just wheat and corn.
This is Weller. Canadian Weller.
Yes. Yeah, wheat has a really interesting texture, and the cool thing about this whiskey is using younger wheat with older corn.
So soft.
The really fun thing about using younger wheat and older corn is you get a lot of foundation, a lot of texture, and a lot of complexity from age. But in turn, you lose grain. And so for us, if we were a distillery where we had to do this as a mash bill, you kind of, to get your age, you lose your grain. To get your grain, you lose your age, right? So when we did this, the wheat was actually pretty fiery. It was pretty lively. But when we took it and we put it on this like gentle little butter soft bed of 21-year-old corn that was so oily and viscous, it cooled off the heat of the wheat without taking away the grain flavor, and so you get that like minty butter shortbread wheat character that I'm absolutely obsessed with, but without the associated like face burn that you usually get when you get those flavors. And so you get almost the texture and the softness of really old whiskey, but you actually still get wheat grain. This was not my brainchild at all. So we have a 4-person team, but 2 of us do most of the blending. The other blender is Sammy Karachi, who's actually the brand ambassador for Edrington for a long time. But he is our director of whiskey innovation, which is my favorite job title ever. I'm pretty jealous. But this was 100% his creation. Sammy came up with this, and we just had this weird wheat component that they sent us, and he was like, "I did this, and you have to try it." And I was like, "This is bloody genius." So.
I don't really like wheat, and I really like this. Charles, you have this one, right?
Yeah.
What's the
We have 1, 3,
This is
5, and 6.
This is 58.1.
You have one
We
in
have
the shop?
4 too.
Yeah. No, we don't have 4.
Oh, sorry, I wrote NA. My bad. Looking at my own notes.
I'll take it for then.
You said you had.
Do you think so? Because of Charles, a lot of us have been able to travel to a lot of distilleries around the world and stuff, which is awesome. Obviously, like in Scotland and Ireland and everything, this has become more of a tourist thing. It never used to be, and I feel like the distillers that we've spoken to, that we've witnessed it's X and it's not X, over and over again, and like we kind of giggle and look at each other of like, last distillery we were just in an hour ago said the complete opposite of this. Do you think that it just became a tourist thing? So like they just had like, we have to have a story for them, and like they were just
Sometimes.
yeah.
So sometimes it's,
Do they believe it themselves that that's what it is, or did someone tell them that?
sometimes it's that cynical where
Yeah.
it's just like, this is it. Sometimes there are fundamental disagreements.
Yeah.
I've been to distilleries. Actually, I know Holly's been to Knockdo, and they don't do hogsheads. If you remember, they only do barrels, because when you're doing a hogshead, you're taking 5 staves and you're making it into you're adding a 6th,
Yeah.
and then you're reconstructing the barrel at that ratio, and that basically a knock whiskeys, they believe that you're gonna screw up the angle and therefore increase the angel share and not make consistent whiskey, and so like everyone else is doing
Yeah,
hogsheads, so
yeah.
that's just a difference of
Yeah.
opinion effectively, or what's effective. Other places, I think a lot of times whiskey is marketed. A lot of times whiskey is marketed based on what they have, right? So, you look at Scotch, right? For 25 years, Scotch's advantage over everything was their age statement. And you can look at like age, right? Age matters. It's all about age. It's all about age. All of a sudden, 2012 hits, and you see all these NASs popping up left and right. And it's not about age anymore at all. Age doesn't matter. It's about blending the young and the old, and this and that and the other thing, right? It's very much about like, we're gonna tell the story of the liquid
And that's what
we
I
have,
feel like we have
and
seen.
that's what and I think a lot of times I know from my experience blending, where we like with this whiskey, we were sitting there and we're like, well, it's awesome. So we're gonna basically explain it, and that's gonna be it. But there's a real temptation to try to make your narrative fix
Of course.
whatever problem you have.
Which is
from a
good
liquid
marketing
standpoint,
also.
right? Which
Yeah,
is good
yeah,
marketing. And so I think sometimes it's a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a fundamental difference in belief of what's important and what matters. And I think sometimes it's a necessity thing, where it's just like, hey, this is how we make our whiskey. This is how.
And people buy off a story too,
And people
so
buy off a
often,
story.
because they don't. I mean, there are some of us that.
In some ways, it was interesting because I had such I was so enamored by the industry when I first got into it, and then when I started digging deeper and realizing that like regionality is bullshit and like some of these things are total nonsense, there was a little bit of like feeling like, oh man, I've been hoodwinked and it's disingenuous. But then the more I got into it, I was just kind of like, there's a commercial side of this, and there's commercial compromises that are made, and that's kind of how it is. And most serious producers are not trying to hoodwink their consumers. There are some, I won't name them, but I truly detest sherry caramel coloring,
Mhm.
where you buy a really cheap sherry cask, you load it up with caramel coloring, you sell it as a sherry cask, you jack up the pricing. I think once people figure that out, it doesn't just hurt the brand, it hurts the entire category.
Mhm.
Things like that, that drives me insane.
I remember the brand that
Oh yeah,
you wouldn't bring in.
yeah, I won't touch it. I
We
won't
don't carry
drink
it in
it.
the shop.
I won't, yeah.
Dalmore?
How did they guess?
I'm just asking.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. No, yeah,
It
so
has a
there's some,
stag on the label.
I mean, what are we hiding? Why are we hiding? What's
because I can't dog brands.
He is
You
always-
brought one up that might fit that category.
No.
But yeah, no, I just, like,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff drives me nuts, but I think
Yeah.
a lot of times people they're doing what makes good whiskey,
Yeah.
and then they're selling it how they have
Well,
to
and
sell
I think like you go to Scotland, like these guys are like this is what their job is. Even Kentucky, the same. Like they're just there. I mean, we've met so many master distillers that like aren't even big like whiskey drinkers. They just like this is what their job is day in day out. It's not like this love and appreciation
Right,
that
totally,
we all
totally.
have for it. They go have Johnny Black when they go to the bar, or have a beer when they go to the bar. So I feel like all of a sudden, tourism became a part of this.
part of the experience.
So they had to have a story, and then they had to stick to that story because they've been saying it for so long.
And some places are better at telling the stories than
Yeah.
others. Yeah.
So we had a question
Yeah.
online. Going back to the components
Yeah.
being, are the grains being, is it column still the whole way? Or-
Sometimes it's column still, sometimes we actually are using stuff that's either column into pot or it's pot distilled.
Okay.
It's
So like
actually
the
a mix.
weeded, is that
The
column?
wheat was, I believe, no, the wheat was pot distilled.
Pot?
Yeah, yeah. I think it was column into pot, if I remember correctly. I used it when it was two batches. I knew exactly every single component, how everyone was made, and how long they were aged for everything. And then we made 6 batches and 18 single barrels, and we're making like 10 new products this year, and I can't keep track of the details anymore. I literally was on my own website before this, being like, right. That's how we did this.
This is propaganda.
I was like, who wrote this? Oh wait, it was me. Shit.
Did I spell check this?
Is this what you're doing full time? Like this is your
What?
job?
This?
Yeah.
Yes.
How long did you like dive into this as like a full time job from the beginning, or?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, no, this was literally has never been not a full time job. Yeah, when we started the importation company, we were doing 9 different products. You know, I was like doing a bunch of different stuff, whether it was private tastings or this or that. But the idea was always to consolidate down. But once we launched Found North, it was 100%. And now, I mean, we're distributed in, I don't know, I think we're distributed in 12 states, available in 42 via e-commerce, and we're about to double the distribution and hopefully triple our volume this year. Like, it's going. And so I thought January was going to be chill. It's like O&D ended, and then January wasn't chill at all. Neither is February so far. So,
Are you always, so when you have batch 1, is batch 1 done?
you mean sold out?
Meaning that
No, it's
you're
right
gonna
here.
make another batch 1?
Oh.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
good question.
seeing this like,
No,
so
that's
I
just-
go to a brewery and they
Right,
make
right, right.
series 6, series 7, series
No,
8.
the cool thing, right. No,
Then
these.
you go back and make batch 1.
Can we go back and make batch 1?
Not
Okay.
all at one.
No, but we can't recreate it. Like, we couldn't recreate.
Right,
We
it's
can't
just not
recreate
gone.
5, right?
Right.
Like,
Okay, sorry, that's what I
yeah.
meant.
Um, but there is, for us, there's a degree to which we want to have.
A core.
No, exactly, right? We want to have batches where they're different. We're doing fun, different things. When it comes out, people are excited to see what we did this time. It's not just like, oh, cool, it's X whiskey and they did it again. At the same time, we also want it's X whiskey, they did it again, so that people have something that they can go back to, where they're like, oh yes, this is Found North, whatever. We haven't named it yet, and we haven't designed it yet. But it's this sort of regular whiskey that's regularly available that's the same.
Have you thought of a cadence on like the numbers? Like, you know, every fourth one is.
You guys need to just sit in on our meeting. 'Cause I was on the phone with my brother for 3 hours.
We'll
as I was
join.
driving
Right,
down
so,
here.
so
We were talking
one
about
is
all of this
one is
stuff.
rye and 2 is corn.
Yeah,
like,
we'll-
is that what you're asking? Like
We will
that
stop.
kind of-
We will make way less rye going forward. We've made much more of a name for ourselves doing these corn dominant whiskeys. We will do limited edition ryes, but
I still like you.
there's just, and it was funny because when I was assumed, I was like rye is so hot right now, right? I was gonna do another Zoolander reference, but it was like, you know, it's Mugatu, right? It's like rye is so hot right now, and I was sure that rye was gonna be like our ticket to paradise. And the thing is, like, a lot of people like the concept of a rye, but people drink way more bourbon. There is like, it's like 15 times as much bourbon consumed in the U.S. every year, right? The bourbon profile wins for a reason. And as a result, this whiskey we've made, which, I don't know, anybody else drink whiskey that's like really like ours? I don't know what there is out there that drinks like ours. There are more things like our ryes than there are our horns. And so it's been something that has been a fun thing for people to get their hands on and kind of feel like their first arrival too. And so we're definitely going to ride that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you know, we think about like the bourbon world in general. Bourbon, for the most part, you know, has a similar flavor profile. I mean, but then you get into the ryes, like, you know, we have the Stauning rye right now, the single barrel that we
Just
have.
tried it at the
I
shop.
mean,
Yeah.
it's like your Found North. It's completely different. There's nothing you can compare it to.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting part of the whiskey journey. It's not, oh yeah, here's another great bourbon that tastes just like the other great bourbon I had
Totally.
a month ago. I mean, which is fine. I'm not dissing bourbon
No,
because,
right.
you know, there's always a place for it and there's beautiful whiskey, but the new stuff is really where it's all about.
And I think for us, that's the thinking behind, we constantly want to be iterating and making things that are exciting and new. At the same time, we want something that
People buy.
Yeah, and
Well, that's very hard.
Do
I
you
mean,
know
look at
how
how hard it is for Stauning.
Yeah,
to-
no, I
to-
know.
To make a presence here in the
But
U.S.
the crazy thing is, like, you can't imagine how many photos we get sent of people who have all our whiskeys. They're like, hey, just bought batch 6, got them all. And they have, like, this much drunk out of them. And I'm like, thank you. Fucking drink it. Buy another one. Stop looking at it. Like, stop drinking it. Where is your thimble-sized shot glass that you're using? Like, I'll send you a Glencairn for free. You know.
They have the
Drink
same
it.
drinking problem that many of us in the club have, is that we try something that we like, we add it to our
Yes.
collection.
What's next?
That's legit.
Yeah, and we like, and the fact is that there are a lot of like. I used to be a whiskey consumer. Now I just drink what I'm making all the time. But for me as a consumer, like, I had things that I had on my shelf, and then I had things that I mindlessly drank and didn't think too much about. And there's a price difference, and there's a flavor difference in those whiskeys. And we definitely want to exist in both realms. That doesn't mean we want to make like a $30 product. But we want to have something that we definitely want to have something that's approachable, that people feel like they're going to be able to get again, right? That's part of the problem. If you have a bottle of batch 2, you're like, oh, shit, I'm not drinking that. That thing's there, right? It's like, it's gone. And that's the double-edged sword of whiskey. That's what makes whiskey so fun, right? Is like, we're all in here because we have bottles of whiskey where the right company in the right moment make it appropriate to drink that whiskey, because it is the ephemeral nature of whiskey that mirrors the ephemeral nature of life that makes us love whiskey. That's my opinion. That's why I got into it. That's
Is that a
why I think-
Zoolander quote?
those are in the computer?
It's actually Zoolander 2.
That's Zoolander 2, yeah. Most people missed that one. Very misunderstood movie. But seriously, like there's that kind of that aspect of it, and that's awesome, and you can build a brand around that.
Which
You
is
just can't
also why
build
we all have
volume.
150 to 200.
200 bottles of whiskey and never are gonna finish, right?
All right, we have another question.
Yes, hit me.
From online. How extensive is the supply of 20+ year corn whiskey?
Not telling. No, it's a really good question. There's way more corn. We've at least been able to find way more corn than old rye. There are a ton of American distilleries that have snatched up all of the old rye that they can get access to. Canadians use it Canadians use the rye. Canadians make their own version of bourbon. They just water it down. It's really weird. I just don't get it. But basically, like, the origin of American whiskey and Canadian whiskey is very Swiss German. And I say that and people are always like, what? I thought it was the Scots and the Irish. Wasn't the Scots and the Irish. And my favorite example is, all right, 1795, this lovely Swiss German immigrant into the United States sold his first barrel of whiskey. His name was Johannes Bohem. And he started selling whiskey. He turned the company over to one of his 12 sons. And his son James took over the company and said, Dad, no one's going to buy Bohem whiskey. We need to anglicize the name. And he took his own name, James Bohem, and he turned it into Jim Beam. That family was the most significant. That's the Ford family of American whiskey. They started 30 distilleries. They started 40 different brands. The Beam family was good at two things: procreating and making whiskey.
They were
Johannes
Johannes
had 12 kids. Jim Beam had 12 kids. They had kids on kids on kids, and every serious whiskey distillery you can think of has had a Beam working at it or running it or started it. And what was really interesting was the influence of rye. The reason we started adding rye to the mash bill was because the Germans wanted it, because their most popular drink in the 18th century was rye schnapps. And so they wanted the heat, the spice. And so in Canada, Canadian rye just has any portion of rye in it, because the big difference was when people started putting rye into their corn and wheat whiskeys, people started saying, hey, I want some of that rye. So for them, their rules on rye are based off of 200 some odd years ago. So their Canadian rye is a bourbon mash bill. The general sort of belief that was codified in 1818 by Harrison Hall in the distiller was that 75% corn, 25% rye. And so in Canada, they've always made a disproportionate amount of corn to rye because they use it only as effectively like a flavoring ingredient. What American distilleries have gone and done is bought 100% rye, slapped a label on it, and called it American rye. And so as you can see, sort of, if there's a fraction amount of it being made over the last 20 years, and it's being used as a 100% component instead of a 20% component, we're draining our supply of old rye from Canada very quickly. Corn is easier to find.
So who's using the old rye in the U.S.?
I shouldn't say.
But you don't see a lot of older age statement ryes.
I mean, I think Hochstadter's puts it right on the label, on the back label that they're getting it. Lockstock, but some of the big guys, like the Little Book was Basil Hayden Dark Rye's Canadian. Like a lot of some of your like big players in the U.S. are actually using some Canadian rye.
You see like Preservation.
Most obvious was Whistle Pig. Whistle Pig was like the OG. They just raided Alberta, and that was the move. Yeah.
So they're 15 and 18.
They're starting to get it from other places, I believe. I can't say why I know. because that would give other things away. But yeah, you can kind of figure out that and they've, I know that I think the Old World uses some MGP rye, or at least originally did, so they started kind of diversifying. But yeah, honestly, like, if it's not a Sazerac and it has an old age statement, it's probably from Canada. Probably, not for sure, but probably. All right, let's drink batch 6.
You were wrong about 5, 6 is the one.
What, let me ask you a question. So, with other,
My own whiskey, right?
with other like Canadian, you know, whiskeys like Alberta Premium and, you know, some of those other, like even the Lot 40, you know, cash straight, whatever. How does that, where do those line up or stack up in terms of the quality of barrels that you get access to? I mean, is that the same kind of stock that you're tapping into? Or?
Totally. I mean, it's interesting because I thought the original Alberta cask strength that came out was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think the subsequent ones have been a little less exciting.
I agree.
I don't
Still
know
high
if they
proof,
changed
but-
the age. You know, if they're running out on supply. I didn't stay sort of tight on that. I love the Lot 40. I believe the Lot 40 cask strength is 100% pot distilled. I think that's their gig.
Okay.
I think.
Right. That sounds
So
right.
that would be a little different than some of the stuff we're sourcing.
Right.
There are a bunch of big ass distilleries in Canada that sell stuff on the secondary market through barrel brokers and things like that, and we pick through that constantly. And they'll send you little samples, and then it goes on auction. And anybody do fantasy football auction drafts? Imagine that for casks. It's really fun. The same idea.
Probably pretty cheap too, right?
That's
I keep ending up in
cheaper
the
than
toilet bowl,
McCaffrey.
so I don't know why I would ever pick casks.
I think you do better with the cast.
Your fantasy football skills don't translate to your.
Hey, I won 2 Super Bowls and 3 toilet bowls.
Yeah,
So
there you go. There you go. I just ate a piece of chocolate because it's been staring at me.
75% or 78%.
Really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Batch 6. Batch 6 is the sequel to 2 and 4. Higher corn component. This is the first time we've used 3 different corn components. There's a 17-year, a 21-year, and a 26-year-old corn component in this. We use some Hungarian oak. That 26-year is some of the Hungarian oak that we used in 4. The ryes were an 18-year and a 19-year. It was, what was it? It was 64.2, I think, 128.4 proof. This was a really fun blend. We kind of wanted to get the oomph of 2 and the basically the depth and the length of finish of 4. That was really what we were going for. I think this is a really fun whiskey. This whiskey is, I think, the one that needs water the most, candidly. I think it. I know.
No.
That was more just a war grunt. Yeah, that's that was whiskey 6 grunt. Yeah.
Don't tell me what to do.
Just need some saliva.
Just hold it on your palate for a little while.
Squeeze your armpits.
Oh, no. I think it opens up like crazy with a drop of water. But if you like your cask strength, cheers.
It's definitely palatable at cash strength.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
What was the
not
ABV of
too-
that?
It's 64.1.
Wow.
or something?
64.2.
Yeah.
But it's not like
Yeah.
unbearable.
Drinks like a
Drinks the most
63.3.
like 2. Too close to 62.
It was delicious.
So you wanted to know if we'd remake 1. We didn't, but we remade 2.
Yeah, I'm not liking it as much as the other one, so I'm gonna leave that in a little water.
The water does open it up.
I didn't bring the droppers, sorry.
Yeah, what the hell, Charles?
They're in the shop,
Can you
they're in
give
the
us
shop.
any, lead into what your co-op?
I got one.
There you go.
Anybody need a dropper?
You
Yeah.
just always have
Is that water in there?
I walk around with distilled water in my pocket. Do you? I do. I am that weird.
By the way, you are real.
Real weird.
By the way, you talked about how you have, you literally drink before breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
It's like which movie's going with
Yeah.
You're on live stream, yeah.
Me? So is
Yes.
Lucas is always on live stream.
My life is like a live stream.
All right, I'm genuinely curious. I hope this is all right. Can I ask what everybody's favorite? Can I just go through 1 through 6? Do you guys can you pick a favorite? Can you remember and pick a favorite?
Four, then 6.
No, I was gonna have a little.
Yeah.
A little vote. No.
We should all shout it at him.
All right.
Everybody yelling on 3.
On 3, yell your favorite. 2, 3. 2! Oh, interesting. Okay. No, all right. Whose favorite was 1? Anyone?
I loved one. I mean, that was.
That's okay. That's all right. No, I like that.
That was my first Found North, like,
One was my first Found North love.
you know.
I have one at
2?
home.
Whose favorite was 2? A couple 2s. 3?
But then 4 and 5.
I like the floral of 3.
Yeah, thank you. All right. 4?
4 is damn good.
5?
It's not my favorite. I love 5.
How many times are you
6?
gonna raise your
Charles, you
hand?
can only love one.
5 was the only time I raised my hand.
That's the only 6. I've been to things where I've
Charles is over there like this.
20 people in the room and 32 want, first place votes, right?
You like number 17,
No, I genuinely, my favorite thing to see is it be spread out.
Yeah.
That's a good sign. It's the last thing you want is for everybody to be like, no, 4, and then it's just like, oh,
Well, I
yeah,
put-
you're like, okay,
I
shit,
put
well,
2
that
and-
one's not available.
I put 2 and 3 together, and that was the best ever.
Blended them together. It's fun.
I will say that like they're all so well balanced, and the nose of all of them were actually really, really good, which I feel like is not something that I've seen consistently through a lot of blends like this. I feel like the nose of everything has been unique, but like amazing.
I was just gonna say, have you
All
noticed 7
right.
yet?
All right,
I just
so
gotta say, 5 smells strange, but then I did it 2 times, and I was like,
it could grow on you. All right, so this is actually a great example of palate fatigue. So I'm gonna explain how palate fatigue works. So the way palate fatigue works, which is totally weird because it screwed me over for a long time with whiskey, is effectively the way your olfactory system works is you have sensory receptors, and when certain molecules, when you're smelling something, it's actually like molecules coming off of that thing and hitting your nose, and your different receptors send a signal to your brain and say apples or whatever the hell you're smelling, right? So that's how your palate works. And by the way, your sense of taste, sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami, that is freaking it. Your taste is pathetic. It is useless. The only reason we taste things is because of the retronasal effect. We experience texture through our nociceptors, basically. It's like our pain receptors. Texture is really the feel of something. It's not the taste. And our taste buds are not very nuanced. Our sense of smell is the retronasal effect telling us what we're tasting. So when you're tasting something, if you get the same molecule over and over, it exhausts the receptor, and when that molecule hits the receptor, it doesn't send a signal to your brain anymore. It stops sending that signal to your brain. So very counterintuitively, if you really wanted to, if somebody said, hey, this whiskey smells like cucumbers, and you're like, I can't remember what cucumbers smell like, and then you smell the whiskey, you're not going to be able to smell the cucumbers on the whiskey because you just nuked your palate with cucumber. It's really counterintuitive. It doesn't suddenly
That's
get
not what the
familiar.
cucumbers are for.
Charles, you always tell us to smell your cucumbers.
actually have coffee.
So, yeah, exactly. So,
The coffee grounds are, I think, over on the.
yeah, there we go. That actually works. So when the time I learned this was I was hosting a blind tasting of all 18-year-old single malts scotches, right? And I did like Oban, Glenmoe, we did Macallan, Glendronach, and then we did Glenfiddich and Highland Park. And okay, right, all the 18 years. It was really fun. I did it as a blind tasting. So what I did was I put Highland Park last because it's the only one that has any peat in it. So we drank the first 5, and then I poured 6, and I wasn't drinking it because I'm doing the presentation, and everybody starts guessing Lefroy. I'm not kidding. Everyone was convinced it was Lefroy.
Dang, that's crazy.
And I was like, what the hell? It's like the lightest peat possible.
Right.
But guess what? When you drink 5 whiskeys that all are throwing the same molecules at you, when you go to whiskey 6 and it has all the same molecules, plus the only differentiator is that 5 ppms of peat, the only thing you can taste is peat. And so I'm like, what is everyone talking about? And I smell it, and it was like a peat bog. It was unbelievable. It's the only thing I could taste.
Wow.
So I don't love pouring this particular whiskey last because the only thing you're going to taste on it at this point is the sherry. This whiskey, I swear to God, is not quite as sherry as it's going to taste to us all right now. But this is a single barrel that we did. So sherry, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, so if you like sherry, no, but basically, we wanted to do single barrels. The problem, of course, with doing single barrels for us is you can't just take a single barrel of one of our components. It would be a shitty whiskey. It's not. I mean, people do it. People do that with Canadian whiskey, right? There's a company. No, I'm not gonna do it.
Do it. Do it.
Okay, there's a company that releases extraordinarily overproofed Canadian whiskeys that they don't blend or do anything to, and they sell it at a grotesquely low price and are literally kicking in the value of Canadian whiskey, and I want to kill them. So no, there are people who actually are doing this, but for us, we were like, okay, you can't just do a single barrel of one of these components. It doesn't make any sense. The whiskey's made to be blended. So how do you create a single barrel program? So we did was we took a blend, and we made a blend of 12-year-old, 19-year-old, and 21-year-old whiskeys. So a 12-year-old rye, a 19-year-old rye, a 21-year-old corn. We blended it together, and then we recast them for a year in a bunch of different casks. This is one of the ones we haven't released yet. It's a Pedro Jimenez sherry butt, so it was in there for about a year. It's 50.
Wait, this is the sherry butt, but you have the same thing in other.
Yes,
barrels?
this is 58.9% alcohol by weight. Yes, we have the same liquid in a bunch of different barrel types.
This is just the one that you.
This is the one I happen to bring here.
And how many different whiskeys are blended in this?
So 3 whiskey blend that's then finished in. It was then finished in 18 different barrels. This is one of those barrels.
This is cool.
It's fun. Yeah.
This is not
What are the
available.
component whiskeys in this?
Not yet. 50%.
But aren't you doing these as like
Yeah.
store picks?
Yeah. So.
Hey, what?
Yeah. What? Hey, huh? Oh.
I know a shop that would.
Yeah. So basically, we really want to like. All right. Who's been to Kentucky? Who's been to Scotland? Who's been to a distillery? Okay. One of the most fun things about going to a distillery is.
The bottle shop.
Yes, thank you. All right, so someone got it. A lot of people said drinking. I admit,
I
it's a
stand
good
by that.
answer. Yeah, that's a legit answer. No, the gift shop, right? Like that's one of the fun things. Is like, all right, what's only available in the gift shop?
Sure.
Yes.
We don't have a distillery. We don't. Where the hell is our gift shop, right? And I wanted
His
to.
car's parked out front.
I literally have a sherry butt in the trunk. That's fun drunk. So what we did, we basically
So no
created
one
our
gets
own
in.
like online gift shop only releases that we do through our mailing list. So we did, the first one we did was our first ever single barrel, which was which actually was a level 3 char Newwood barrel. It sold out in 12 minutes, which was fun, but shocking. Did somebody get it?
Yes.
Yes! Yeah, that thing was fun, wasn't it? Yeah.
I haven't opened it yet, cause
Oh,
I
he's that
said
guy.
I wanted to compare it to the rest of the single barrels that I could possibly acquire.
Oh shit, okay.
Alright,
Yeah.
so there you go.
Greg, you always say that.
That's pretty
You
fun.
say the same thing.
He
I
said
don't
you-
open anything because I want to compare it.
People you want to
At
share.
He
some
sent you a
point.
picture of all 6 of your releases unopened.
Yeah. He's one of the assholes who has everything open. It's like, hey, this
He
one's for
took
the
that very
bunker.
personally.
No, so basically, we're gonna do releases. We'll do not just single barrels, but we'll do releases that are effectively our version of gift shop only. Which is, if you're on our mailing list, you get an email, you get a link, you get a chance to buy the whiskey. This is one of them. This we have bottled, but we haven't released yet. And
So it's 50% 12-year rye, what's the other 50%?
it's 20% 19-year-old rye and it's 30% 21-year-old corn, and then it's been aged for another year.
Wow. So it's 150 years old.
Lucas, your math gets better throughout the night.
Hey, Lucas.
I said that to get a laugh. Jesus Christ.
Lucas, why don't you go snort a cucumber?
He already did that.
Who's ready to go out?
I'm afraid to touch this plate now because I feel like everything has been snorted here.
I'm eating the things I snorted.
First time I've heard that.
The best tasting so far on the club right here. Holy shit. Just comedy.
Oh man. All right. Any remaining questions? In case you're wondering, this is an English cucumber.
It is. I unwrapped the plastic. Any more questions, anybody?
Is it just the email list on your website that is signed up for
Yeah.
that gets okay?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a special email list.
No, nothing special. No, you go to the you go to the homepage, you scroll down, boom.
All right, if that's it for questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream. I know we have people online which have like about a 30-second delay, so they're not going to hear this by the time I stop the live stream. Yeah, so thank you, Nick. Before I stop this, we really love your whiskeys in the shop, and it's wonderful to have a vertical like this. I don't know how many clubs out there have been able to do a seven pour Found North.
The only time I've done this.
Yeah, so there you go. We make it happen.